The skies over Europe in 1943 were a graveyard of ambition. Every day, thousands of young men climbed into their aircraft, knowing that the odds were against them. Engines roared, propellers spun, and bombers lumbered into formation, great metallic birds flying in perfect, doomed symmetry. Below them, the continent burned. Above, the thin blue air belonged to death. The United States had entered the war determined to bring the fight to the enemy's industrial heartland. Factories, refineries, railways, these were the lifeblood of the Nazi war machine. The strategy was clear: destroy Germany's capacity to make war by daylight precision bombing. But by late 1943, that dream was collapsing. The price of daylight bombing was measured in men, in bomber crews who rarely survived long enough to complete their 25 missions. The numbers told a chilling truth. For the airmen of the 8th Air Force, survival was not a matter of courage. It was a matter of luck. And the problem had a name: the Luftwaffe. By the autumn of 1943, the 8th Air Force faced disaster. Their losses over Germany had become unsustainable. In the skies above Schweinfurt, Regensburg, and Bremen, the cost of each mission was counted in burning aircraft and falling men. On October 14, 1943, came the turning point: the second raid on Schweinfurt. It would become known among air crews as Black Thursday. That morning, 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses took off from England. Their target, the ball-bearing factories of Schweinfurt, critical to German aircraft and tank production. As the bombers crossed the coast, their escorts, P-47 Thunderbolts, turned back. Their range was too short to go any farther. The heavy bombers pressed on alone into the heart of Germany. Waiting for them were hundreds of German fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, piloted by veterans of the Eastern Front. The result was slaughter. Wave after wave of fighters tore through the bomber formations. Some fortresses exploded in mid-air, others limped home, riddled with holes, their wounded crews fighting to stay alive. Of the 291 bombers that left England that morning, 60 were lost. Nearly 600 men never came home. It was clear: the bomber offensive could not continue under these conditions. The Allies had the machines, the manpower, and the will. But without control of the air, they could not win the war. The heart of the problem lay not with courage, but with range. Allied escort fighters, the P-38 Lightning and the P-47 Thunderbolt, could only accompany the bombers part of the way into Germany. Once they turned back for England, the bombers were on their own, easy prey for the Luftwaffe. Every mile deeper into the Reich meant more losses. The solution would come in the form of a new machine, a sleek, powerful aircraft that would change the course of the war, the P-51 Mustang. When the British first tested the Mustang in 1942, they saw promise in its aerodynamic design but found its engine lacking. The transformation came when Rolls-Royce fitted it with their Merlin engine, the same engine that powered the Spitfire. The result was extraordinary. At high altitude, the Mustang was fast, agile, and above all, long-ranged. It could fly deep, into Germany, escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. But an airplane alone does not win a war. It needs leadership, vision, and courage to use it in ways no one else had dared. That man was Major General James Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle was a pilot's pilot, a man born for the air. Before the war, he was already a legend, a racing champion, a scientist, and the leader of the daring 1942 raid on Tokyo. He understood not just machines but men, and the psychology of combat. On January 6, 1944, Doolittle assumed command of the 8th Air Force. That same day, he changed the air war forever. Until then, fighter squadrons had been told that their primary mission was to protect the bombers, to stay close, to guard, to react. It was a defensive doctrine, cautious and inflexible. Doolittle tore up the rulebook. He issued a new order that electrified every pilot under his command. The first duty of the 8th Air Force fighters, he said, is not to bring the bombers back alive, but to destroy German fighters. It was a radical shift, from escort to aggressive hunt. Instead of flying in tight defensive formations, Doolittle's Mustangs would sweep ahead of the bombers, seeking out the Luftwaffe wherever it hid. The sky would no longer be a shield. It would become a weapon. The new doctrine unleashed a wave of controlled aggression. Fighter pilots who had long chafed at the limits of escort duty were now given freedom and responsibility. They ranged ahead of the bomber streams, high above the clouds, looking for the telltale glint of German aircraft climbing to intercept. When they found them, the result was chaos. No longer could German pilots choose the time and place of attack. The Americans hit first, and hit hard. The new P-51s could outclimb, outturn, and outdive most German fighters. Their range allowed them to pursue the enemy far beyond what had been thought possible. And Doolittle's orders didn't end when the bombers reached their targets. After completing escort duty, Mustang squadrons were free to roam at will, sweeping low over German airfields, strafing runways, hangars, and aircraft parked wingtip to wingtip. The message was brutal and clear. There was no longer any safe place for the Luftwaffe, not in the sky, and not on the ground. In February 1944, Doolittle's new strategy faced its greatest test. Operation Argument, known to the airmen as Big Week, was designed to break the Luftwaffe once and for all. For 6 days from February 20th to 25th, the Allies launched massive coordinated raids against German aircraft factories. The plan was simple and deadly. Use the bombers as bait to draw the Luftwaffe into the air, then let the newly aggressive fighters tear them apart. The sky over Germany became a giant trap. Wave after wave of American and British bombers pounded targets at Leipzig, Regensburg, Augsburg, and Stuttgart. The Luftwaffe responded with everything it had. Hundreds of fighters scrambled to intercept. But this time the outcome was different. The P-51s and P-47s were waiting. The air was filled with dogfights, twisting, screaming duels fought at full throttle. Engines flamed, wings snapped, men parachuted into the cold German countryside. By the end of Big Week, the results were catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. Germany lost hundreds of aircraft and, more critically, the irreplaceable men who flew them. The German High Command boasted that they could build more planes, but they could not build new pilots. Between January and May 1944, over 1,000 veteran Luftwaffe fighter pilots were killed or captured. They were the elite, the best-trained aviators in Europe, and their loss shattered Germany's air defense. By the spring of 1944, the balance of power in the air had reversed. Where once German fighters hunted Allied bombers, now American Mustangs hunted the Luftwaffe. The kill ratios told the story. By May, U.S. fighters were destroying German aircraft at a rate of 4-1. Entire German squadrons disappeared within weeks. For the Luftwaffe, it was the beginning of the end. Fuel shortages, inexperienced replacement pilots, and relentless attacks left their airfields empty. Once bustling bases became silent graveyards of wrecked aircraft. Even the skies over Berlin, once a fortress of anti-aircraft fire and German air power, were now dominated by American wings. On May 8, 1944, a massive U.S. raid flew deep into Germany. The Luftwaffe barely responded. They had run out of planes, pilots, and hope. The air belonged to Doolittle. Air supremacy came at a terrible cost. Between 1942 and 1945, more than 26,000 American airmen of the 8th Air Force were killed in action, a loss rate higher than the U.S. Marine Corps. Yet their sacrifice achieved what once seemed impossible. The skies over Europe were now Allied territory. The bombers could strike at will. German industry, oil refineries, and transport networks were shattered beyond repair. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, had been bled to death. On June 6, 1944, as dawn broke over Normandy, the ultimate test of Doolittle's strategy arrived. Operation Overlord, D-Day. To succeed, the invasion needed one thing above all: total control of the air. That morning, Allied aircraft flew more than 14,000 sorties over France. The Luftwaffe managed fewer than 300 Dogfights. German pilots who did take off found themselves overwhelmed before they could reach the beaches. The few who survived never returned to the air. For the soldiers storming the beaches, the empty sky above them was the greatest comfort imaginable. They knew that somewhere above, unseen but ever present, the 8th Air Force was watching over them. The invasion succeeded, and with it, the fate of Nazi Germany was sealed. When Jimmy Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force, he inherited a force on the brink of collapse. When he left, he had built the mightiest air armada in history. His order, to seek out and destroy the enemy, was condemned by some as reckless, but history would remember it as decisive. He understood what few others dared to admit, that victory in modern warfare does not come from defense, but from the relentless pursuit of the enemy's destruction. After the war, Doolittle returned to civilian life, humble and reflective, carrying the memory of thousands who never came home. In 1985, at the age of 88, he was awarded the rank of full 4-star general, the only reservist in U.S. history to be so honored. Today, when you stand in silence beneath the wide blue sky, it's hard to imagine the roar of engines, the rattle of machine guns, the smoke trails of dying planes.